Welcome to the Golden Hinde podcast, where we'll be chatting about everything from Francis Drake's circumnavigation of the world to the Spanish Armada, Elizabethan seafaring, pirates, to the adventures of our full-scale reconstruction in the heart of London. This episode of the Golden Hinde podcast is presented by...
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Gary. I'm one of the crew here at the Golden Hinde. If you've ever joined us on board for one of our tours, then you will have no doubt heard all of the stories surrounding the history of the ship, the current restoration project. We often talk about where the stories about where the ship has been, how we're replacing the timbers, the planks, where the ship has visited. But something we often overlook is what actually allows the ship to move. And that is, of course, the rigging and the sails. Today, we're going to dive a little deeper into that subject because, as luck would have it, we have a very special guest with us here today, a historical ship rigger, Courtney Andersen. Hello, Courtney. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's very early over there in the States, but you've made the effort, so you've gone above and beyond and joined us. You'll be happy to know I've made myself a cup of tea to join you in the breakfast drinks.
Excellent. I have mine sitting here next to my computer, so all good.
Good to know. Would you mind firstly sort of introducing yourself and telling us a bit more about what it is you do and how you've come to do it?
Sure. Well, I always grew up as a little kid with a love of the water. And I was always near rivers and oceans, and then down on the Gulf of Mexico. And I just was always interested in sailing ships and pirates and history. That whole era of sail was fascinating to me. So I had worked on a replica of the Bounty that was in Miami, Florida at the time. And just started, I was a tour guide, but I started helping out the rigger on board. And I would work with him a little bit, and then during the day, and then go back to school in the evening and read old rigging books to try to understand what it was that I was looking at. Somehow just got fascinated with ship rigging,
right?
More so than the rest of the vessel, but that was the kind of the fascination for me. That was on the Bounty, the replica that they did, Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962 with Marlon Brando.
Oh, Brando! Wow,
yeah.
Big names.
Yes.
And was it a sort of case that the rigger would sort of say terms and different jargon to you, and you'd be like, "Oh, I need to go back and find out what that means." And that's often what happens with me and our lead ship, right?
Yeah, he was working up in the rigging, and he'd say, "Hey, I need something hauled up to me. Can you haul this line?" And I'm like, what do I do with it? And so, showed me literally right from the ground up, basically that kind of education. He showed me how to splice rope. And then this book called Darcy Lever's Young Sea Officer's Sheet Anchor was this book written in the early 1800s, for British midshipmen to learn how to put their rigging together for a ship. And so it was interesting to see how things were done, because even that Bounty replica, things were done a little more modern. There were a lot of shackles that were used and some metal fittings. So it that whole evolution is what ended up fascinating me with rigging, is how it changed from the early days to the 20th century.
Sure. And with the Bounty, do you know if that's still around today? Is that still going strong?
Oh, no. Unfortunately, she sank in Hurricane Sandy back in, good Lord, I think it was like 2012 or something. Yeah. That's just like in the old days.
Well, yeah, no, quite right. I guess once they're in something like that, there's not much you can do, hey?
No.
So you're studying in Florida, you work on the Bounty. What happens then? What sort of progresses your interest in rigging, or more importantly, where do you go from there and what do you do with it?
After that, I had moved up to Connecticut and New York, and one day I wasn't working on ships at that point. There were a couple of years where I was on land, and
Right, sure.
and I happened to be driving along the Hudson River and saw the masts of a sailing ship sticking up over the trees. So I found a way down to this park, and there was this replica of Henry Hudson's ship, the Half Moon, sitting there. And so I really sat there for literally about half an hour just looking at how that was rigged, and was thinking, God, I really missed this. I should really try to get back on a boat. And so I called the organization that owned it and talked to the captain, and eventually made a sail on her from Maryland up to New York. And
wow, how was that?
Oh, it was wonderful. It was great. Yeah, it was. There's wooden ships. All wooden ships have a certain smell and a certain just a really, really neat atmosphere, and it was like coming home to be back on board a sailing ship. So
you felt sort of very comfortable in that environment, and and at ease. That's great. That's incredible. And just literally, you were just passing by.
I was literally just driving by and saw the tops of the masts sticking up, and so and I ended up being on there for 7 years. And
7 years. And then were you sort of the go-to guy on that ship when in terms of rigging, or did you feel like you were still learning? What sort of role did you have to play?
When I first started, I knew what things were and how they basically worked. But for the winter, we did a down rig of the ship, brought all the sails off, took the yards and off and lowered the topmasts, brought them off. Mm-hmm. And the captain said that, everything needed work, and would I be interested in working with a rigger he had hired to refurbish all of this gear. I said, absolutely. And so that winter I worked with another traditional ship rigger here in the States, Jim Barry, who I learned a great deal from over the course of that winter. And then we put it all back together in the spring. And after that, that's when I stayed on as the rigger and what's called a bosun.
Sure.
So every year I was in charge of downrigging the ship and all the maintenance and putting it all back up. And
great, amazing. And then you sort of became an expertise in that field, I guess. People did they seek you out, or were you like, on to my next adventure?
Well, I was pretty busy on there for those 7 years, although I did spend a winter in the Netherlands doing research on Dutch 17th century and 16th century rigging.
Oh, okay.
And so I mean, I'm still learning. There still is so much to learn about that whole field, but eventually I did start getting calls from other organizations and vessels asking for help or advice or information.
And what were your sort of findings when you were studying the Dutch rigging of the 1600s? Was there stuff that you were like, oh, I can totally see where that's come from, or there's stuff like that we still use today?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most fascinating things about researching a time period that you don't have really written descriptions of, where everything is based on models or paintings or engravings. You see things in these pictures, for instance, and you think, I don't know what that is or why that is. And we had gear on the ship that we'd see in these paintings. And you basically, if you duplicate what you see in the painting, eventually you figure out how it's used, and that makes complete sense.
Yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it? It often fascinates me when people talk about these things. I'm like, but how did they know?
Yeah.
And people, well, they just did. Yeah, but how did they know? It just worked. Incredible.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to come over to the UK, or did you spend most of your time in the Netherlands?
I spent most of the time in the Netherlands, but I did, my girlfriend and I did a trip over to London for the weekend. And that was my first time in England. I had always wanted to go. I'm a huge Anglophile. And
Really? Well, bless you. Someone has
oh my God, it was wonderful. And we just walked all over London. When I was growing up, I had, read everything I could about London as well. And it was funny. I kind of knew where everything was, but I had no idea of what the scale was, like how far things were.
Right. Yeah.
So we wandered all over and actually came across Golden Hinde sitting there at St. Mary Overy Dock. And
that happens quite a lot.
Yeah.
So what were your initial thoughts upon seeing the ship? Did you sort of look up at the rigging and go, "Ooh, that's zigged when it should have zagged," or what were your thoughts?
She was absolutely beautifully rigged. I believe at that point everything was still mostly the hemp rigging that she had been built with. It was beautiful to see. And so I sat there staring at it and looking again, just staring at rigging. And I asked somebody at the gangway there, I was like, "Hey, I see there's some rigging work going on. Is there a rigger on board that I could talk to?" And I was kind of envisioning this, ancient bearded pipe smoking guy that was going to teach me these really bizarre things that no one knew anymore about rigging. And so they said, "Yeah, we'll get him for you." And I was sitting there all waiting, all excited. And it was this guy I knew from the States who came down the gangway and said, "Dude, what are you doing here?" Apparently he had been called over to do some work on board. So
no way.
Yeah. Small world.
Absolutely. And again, I've no doubt he was just driving by one day and saw a topmast. And thought,
probably.
Hey, it's always the case. Oh, fascinating. Brilliant. It's one of those things at the site now where we're doing all of this restoration work and refurbishment, and we often look up and we all sort of pull that face like, "Oh, this is when that comes around, this is going to be a chore," and no one's still quite sure how. Yeah, no, absolutely. You clearly are the guy. But we've got all these things ready, like the fighting tops and stuff, and every time we talk about installing them, we're like, "Oh, now we've got to figure out how to get everything down and get a crane in central London."
Nah, you need a crane for that.
No? I'll tell them. He'll be happy.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, with all of this experience and sort of work you'd been doing, you over email when we were talking, I hear that you were hired to be on a very well-known movie franchise and help them design their ships. So tell us about that. How did that come about?
I was still working on the Half Moon. We were in a shipyard doing a lot of work on her. We had been in the yard for about 6 weeks.
Right.
And the phone rang and I picked it up and this guy said, "Hey there, I'm so-and-so calling from Disney Studios, and we're doing this Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and we need someone to design and build the ship rigging for the movie. And, we've asked around and your name came up a few times, so we thought we'd give you a call. Would you be interested?" And I said, "No."
Yeah. Sorry, busy.
But they said, "Well, I tell you what, we'll think about it. We'll call you in a week." And they called back and they said, would you just come out for like a week and take a look at what we're doing and let us know if we're doing things right or if we're going in the right direction with things. And so I talked to the captain on the Half Moon, and he agreed to let me go. And I went out to California, and it was so much energy and so much creativity.
Really?
It was
like, obviously in a positive way. Yeah.
Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah. It was basically, I was working with the art department and the director, like directly, and they'd say what they wanted to see. And, I'd figure out how to make it happen. So it was wonderful.
Now, my experience when it comes to sort of filming and these things is they always want to do the minimal they have to at
Yes.
a fraction of the cost they
Yep.
need to.
Yep.
What was your sort of, was that the case then? They wanted to get it looking good, or was it full on?
I had actually, before Pirates, I had worked for 2 weeks. That friend of mine, Jim Barry, the rigger, he had gotten the lead rigging job on Master and Commander down in Mexico.
Oh, yeah,
And
sure.
so he asked if I could come down for a little bit and help out. So I worked on that with him, and then another master rigger, this Australian guy named Igor Bjorkston. And
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a rigger's name.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I learned an amazing amount from Igor in this really short period of time. And he had a real appreciation for the history. He said he had learned from an old guy who had gone to sea when he was a kid, who had learned from an old guy who had gone to sea when he was a kid.
Sure.
And so but what I saw happening was that Igor and Jim were trying to do everything exactly the way it was done on a ship. And their production managers were constantly yelling at them, like, you have to make this happen faster. It can't, and stop spending so much money. And so when I got out on Pirates that first day, I, sat in this big conference room with the art director and the production designer, and the production designer, the first thing he said to me was, here, and he tosses a book kind of casually across the table, and it was a first edition of that Darcy Lever book that I had studied when I was
No way.
And he said, this is how I want everything done. If you just follow this, it'll all be fine. And I said, well, I certainly can do that, and I'd be happy to, but that's going to take probably about a year to build the rig for the ship, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. But
right.
I know if you tell me what you're looking for, I can make it look good on film. So that was kind of the creative part of that whole world, was understanding ship rigging enough to be able to fake it
yeah, right.
on film to make it look good, but obviously not cost what a real ship would cost.
Yeah. I thought as much, but it's nice to know it's not just sort of in our case when those things happen.
Yeah.
So what happens after you're studying in the Netherlands? Do you go back to the States then and sort of pick a spot where you want to settle down, or tell us about your journey from there?
Well, after the Netherlands, that was just for a winter, and I was still working on the Half Moon. I think at that point I worked on board for about another 3 or 4 years. So, I was back in New York and living and working on the ship. And then Pirates came along. I went out to California for that. And after the first one, they said, well, we're going to do more of these. So if you want to come out here, you'll probably have work for a while. So I moved out to California, LA, and lived there for about 5 years and did the other two.
Brilliant.
2 and 3, the sequels, and then that kind of dried up. It was like, well, I think we're done making pirate movies, so had to look for a real job. And the Maritime Museum in San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park, was looking for a rigger, and so I came up for a summer and worked at the Maritime Museum up in San Francisco. And then the permanent position came up. So I moved up onto my boat that I had bought up here. And
no way.
Yeah. So I've been here since about 2009, I believe it is. So, and they've been great about letting me take some periodic time off to work on other projects. So I did the fourth Pirates that ended up happening in Hawaii, and re-rigged a replica called the Nonsuch up in Canada.
Tell us a bit more about the Nonsuch. What sort of era was it from? And I appreciate it's a replica, but was it like a merchant vessel? Was it What sort of ship was it?
Yeah, so that was a 1640s era ketch, a square rig ketch. That was a kind of a small vessel, about 55, 60 feet on deck. They were used a lot for communication between ships and fleets. They were used sometimes as bomb catches. They were used as merchant vessels. This particular one was sent over to Canada. Again, there was like a company of gentlemen who put some money together. They wanted to break into the beaver fur industry in Canada, getting furs for the fur felt hats that were the big popular item.
Sure.
So this company sent this ship over to Hudson's Bay in Canada, and they traded with the people there, got a bunch of furs, brought them back to England, and that voyage was what started the Hudson's Bay Company, which is still in business today.
Sure.
So this replica was built to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the Hudson's Bay Company. It was built in Devon at a shipyard in Appledore, and
is it the same shipyard where the current replica of the Golden Hinde was built as well?
Yes, exactly, and that's why that shipyard was chosen to build Golden Hinde, because they had done such a beautiful job with Nonsuch.
Right.
And there they had two old guys who were, I think they were in their 80s, who had been riggers, and they got them out of retirement, and they're the ones who rigged the ship, both yours and Nonsuch.
So obviously the various ships and replicas you've worked on, they're from various timelines, 1600s, and the Pirates of the Caribbean, we're talking sort of the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of major differences did you see with the rigging, if any, or was it a similar framework but on a grander scale? Was there anything that sort of stood out to you?
Well, the pirates thing was kind of fun because for instance, the Flying Dutchman in the pirate movies, I was able to do everything Dutch style rigging on there. Things that nobody would notice.
But you did. So but
it was fun. So whereas the other vessels, in the movies and vessels like Nonsuch and Golden Hinde that I've worked on are British vessels. They're particular things about the way parts of the rigging are put together that identify them, and it really identifies the time period and the country where they're from. So it's that's where it gets really detailed.
So there's things that you could, as a rigger, look at and be like, well, that by the design of that's clearly a Dutch or French. Oh, that's incredible! That is so cool. I can't tell you exactly.
It's kind of fun. I've been in contact with the archaeologists who are excavating the wreck of Blackbeard ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, off of North Carolina.
Wow. Yeah. And
periodically they send me pictures of things, and they're like, "What is this?" And
that's a crab.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, exactly. But it's fun. Yeah, I told them, like, from one little deadeye, you can tell the size of a ship. You can tell what country it was likely from, what era it was from. So there's lots of details like that really identify once you kind of get the picture of how rigging evolved.
Sure. Yeah. That's amazing. And I believe you worked on a steel hull ship as well.
Yes. So here at the Maritime Museum, it's a much, much bigger vessel called the Bell Clutha. She was built in Scotland in 1886. And, all the same features are there. It's just how they've evolved in the 19th century. So instead of a lot of wooden masts and wooden spars. They were steel, and instead of a lot of the things that used to be hemp rope or manila rope are wire on board.
Right.
With us, so it's a lot heavier, a lot bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still the same things.
And is that still with you in San Fran now, or?
Yes, yeah, that's permanently docked at the Maritime Museum.
Brilliant. And so, what's your sort of like day-to-day routine then at the moment?
Well, at the moment, things are strange.
Fair.
Yeah, we were shut down completely for a couple of months, where basically every other day somebody would go in just to make sure the ships were still tied up to the pier and hadn't sunk or burned or anything. And now we're getting back into it. We've been working, my rigging crew and I have been working for past couple of months, pretty much full time, but the park is still closed to the public. So,
Sure.
A great time to get a lot of work done that, tarring rigging and painting things and things that when the public's there, it's a little difficult. So we've been doing a lot of maintenance work on the ships.
Yeah, we're in the exact same position. When things got quieter, we decided, you know what, let's see if we can use this to our advantage. Yeah. And it's been great to see the work that's happening.
Yeah.
But equally, it's a shame that we can't share it with people. And so, is there anything else you'd like to share with us that from your studies or on your journey, that's things that you've sort of picked up or noticed, whether it's, the bad weather in England or the passive aggressiveness on the tube, or anything else that you sort of picked up over your years' experience in the sort of rigging industry?
Well, like I said, the main thing that keeps me interested is that I'm always learning new things. Old things, actually. I'm learning old things, and that's really fascinating. And also just how, I started focusing on this one little thing, ship rigging. But it is interesting how many connections it has to everything else, history, art, literature. It's neat to be able to tie things together and to see these connections. And, for me, rigging has been the way that I have learned so much about the past. So it's, and it is an evolution.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it's a rabbit hole that you dived down, and I'm almost certainly going to follow you on that journey. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us this early in the morning. I appreciate the time and for sharing the stories. It's an incredible journey, and I'm glad we were able to hear it.
Thank you.
And in the future, I'm no doubt I'll certainly be pestering about the rigging.
Please do. I'd love to get back on there again.
Great. Courtney, thank you so much for your time.
All right.
Stay safe and take care.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
That was the Golden Hinde podcast. For more information, head over to our website, goldenhinde.co.uk. Remember, there's a letter E on the end of Golden Hinde. You'll find videos, blogs, educational resources, and of course, all the details you'll need to come and visit us. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.